Immigration has been taking the reins in headlines, and Wednesday, a judge will hear arguments in a lawsuit against a rule that is a key part of the Biden administration's immigration policies. More recently, civil rights groups are suing Florida and DeSantis over his immigration law in the state of Florida. To break all of that down for you guys, I have Elaine Wood, Chief Legal Officer at Heyman-Woodward Immigration Law Firm. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So let's backtrack a little bit. So, I talked about immigration. People might have heard the term Title 42, immigration, border control, all of that. For those who may have forgotten or who don't really know, what is Title 42 and how does that impact migrants now?
Excellent. So we still have some residual effects of Title 42 being over in May of this year. So if you recall back in the COVID era, the CDC put in place Title 42, which basically allowed for officers to expel people, and they ultimately expelled about 2 million people from the border, citing public health crisis reasons. And then when that was lifted, we had an influx of people coming.
Immigration has been taking the
Expel people, and they ultimately expelled about 2 million people from the border, citing public health crisis reasons. And then when that was lifted, we had an influx of people coming, seeking survival, seeking asylum. And now, according to Customs and Border Patrol, actually the numbers for June have been down by 42% since May. So we're looking at approximately 100,000 people at this point. So it's not as many people as it had been to process initially.
Right. Now, is there any data that indicates that since Title 42 ended, that, surges have gotten worse or better? I know you mentioned some of those numbers as well, but can you kind of elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yes, so there's now statistics coming out, basically looking at the reports from processing. So at the border, when people are coming through, then we will have those numbers. So it's actually, again, decreased since May, which is something to really keep in mind because you have a lot of hearsay about so many people coming, and which is true, there is a lot, and it is a crisis. We need housing, we need hospitals, but it's decreased from what it was. Initially, the expulsion was 2 million. Now in June, it was about 100,000 people coming in. So it's starting to streamline a bit at this point.
Now, I kind of want to switch gears to what I mentioned a little bit earlier about civil rights groups suing the DeSantis and the state of Florida over his immigration law. The presidential candidate has been in headlines as well as far as shipping migrants who have come to Florida to different places across the country. He's made it very clear that there is a plan that he has in place for migrants who do try to come to Florida. Why do you think these civil rights groups decided to go after DeSantis on this issue?
The lawsuit specifically focuses on the provisions that criminalize transportation of individuals into Florida when they may have entered the country unlawfully and had not been identified as inspected by the federal government. So what's happening as part of the argument of these civil rights groups against DeSantis and other officials in Florida is that it's unconstitutional for the state of Florida to be preventing immigrants from entering Florida. So this is something that the federal government, immigration, does, not a state-by-state basis in this way. So criminalizing as a felony this transportation can end up having a person charged with a second-degree felony for each violation of the law. So you can start to add up and do the math on that. Basically, what's happening is the lawsuits challenging these officials in Florida who are trying to take over power that's vested in the federal government exclusively for the federal government under the Constitution of the United States. And as we know, history repeats itself, and most often the Constitution stands firm, and these other things, meant for soapboxes, the political gain, and all the rest of it, eventually burn out their 15 minutes in the spotlight.
Now, can we see this impacting travel? This is Orlando, this is Florida, it's touristy. Can we see this immigration law, this effort by the governor impacting, people's vacation or people who work at places such as the theme parks like Disney, Universal, some of the hotels? How will this impact them?
That's an excellent question. It affects everybody, from the food supply chain, workers in the labor industry protesting at tomato farms, from people in hospitality industry working or visiting, trying to go to a theme park, and then turns out perhaps maybe it's closed one day because there's nobody to work. So basically, you'll see across the state of Florida now, hundreds of people are gathering to peacefully protest this Florida Senate bill. And what's happening by imposing restrictions on undocumented immigrants, people cannot cross state lines. People are scared to go to the hospital because now if the hospital takes Medicaid, then on their intake forms, there's a notification about citizenship or what's your citizenship status. So that's something that we are keeping an eye on at this point, because it's not just directly affecting particular individuals, but it actually affects labor supply chains, economic supply chains, and workers' rights generally.
Right. I mean, this is a huge issue, huge topic that just seems to always come up. We're seeing it from New York, Florida, Texas. Governor Abbott over in Texas has been doing something very similar to what Governor DeSantis has been doing in Florida. We will be continuing to cover this migrant crisis and some of these issues that pertain to those who trying to make their way to the U.S. Is there anything else that you would like to add that I did not mention?
I think I would just add what you highlighted earlier on, which is about the presidential campaigns. So, caught in the crossfire of these political gains are people in human rights crisis. So, I was just mentioning the other day to our staff in the New York City office about people at the Roosevelt Hotel. Children are concerned about their last resort to be in a tent on the street. And so I would just like to emphasize the importance of having data when making claims about migrants being criminals or migrants being somehow second class to American citizens. Because in the end, what's happening as we're fighting it out in court now, ALA, ACLU, challenging what DeSantis is doing here in Florida, there's a lot of people caught in this crossfire here in the middle. So yeah, it might affect you trying to go to Disney. It might affect you trying to buy some vegetables. These are not things that are isolated. This affects economic impact locally, statewide, nationally, internationally, and it's not just for DeSantis and his political gain, but in fact, this affects people across the world.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Elaine Wood, Chief Legal Officer at HAYMAN-WOODWARD Immigration Law Firm, for speaking with us. We look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you so much.